And it takes at least 2 years for the Olympic legislature to make any changes. So the discussion needs to start so that they can start figuring out with their deficits and everything else, especially in transportation, on how they're going to handle this bi-state unique opportunity. I believe there is a pressing need to advance the discussion with Olympia. Advancing a specific funding strategy, I absolutely agree with you. But we need to start the research and start the discussion up in Olympia so that we can find out what the appetite is for that. As we move forward with this, and with this administration, you're absolutely right. This new administration may not allow LRT. It might very well be a dedicated lane to BRT, but we're still going to need to fund it. But in order to get a high rating by the SIG, we're going to need to have our act together and everything lined up. So I hope to hear from Alex that we are continuing with a legislative priority to start the research on how the state of Washington is going to fund this. So when the time comes, everything is laid out, ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, and did you want to say something, or I could
go ahead.
Okay. So appreciate all of those comments, Chair. I think what we were looking at least in terms of the staff side, because the FTA, we had assumed not too many months ago that the FTA would be submitting for the rating in the early to middle part of 2025 next year. That's been pushed back a year now to 2026. The work that IBR has been doing kind of behind the scenes leads them to believe that they are currently going to be able to achieve a medium rating based on what they have available to it today. And it's the beginning of that process. It's the initial rating. You're correct that if all of the funding was identified and committed from both states, from both transit agencies, from any other funding partners, well, I guess the feds are funding partners as well through the FHWA, at least right now, that it would lead to a higher financial rating. But one of the reasons the project's in a pretty good position on the financial rating side currently is in part due to the Senator Murray language from that previous project, and maybe that's what Steve was going to speak to. So I think from the initial rating, the program anyway feels like it's in a pretty strong position as it relates to the financial side. Do you want to add anything?
No, I did want to touch on that. We've done some spitball modeling of the ratings, and actually the local financial commitment is really what carries the whole project to that medium rating. Because of the acts by both the Oregon and Washington legislature, because of the federal funds already committed to this project, that's actually the shiniest of the results and the ratings that the project has in this group is local financial commitment. Madam Chair, I don't disagree with you at all about proceeding with haste, and we should proceed with haste on all of these things so it doesn't get away from us.
Thank you. I agree. As we looked at the ridership from Taylor's numbers, especially on the Express, if the FTA takes those numbers right now, they're not going to be happy. It's not a good look from where we were on 2019. And with this administration, we need every bonus point we can get. So I'm pushing that this staff tells the CEO to have her staff get back up into Olympia and start researching what is the appetite going on up there to handle this cost, and not sit back and let the IBR think that they have everything going smoothly and all is well.
Yeah, and I mean, that's an important conversation to have. I will note that we don't have, at least in the current draft of the state legislative agenda, specific language, and part of the challenge here is when we're going to Olympia to kind of engage in these conversations, we usually have a specific item or specific wording for a specific bill. And in this case, it's a little bit more general, if I'm hearing you correctly, Chair. And so, if there's an opportunity to maybe kind of talk through a little bit more this evening, what that could or should look like to establish some parameters, so we're not necessarily advocating for anything too specific without first receiving that clear direction from the board. I think that's one of those situations that when Leanne and I and others have spoken, that we're a little bit concerned about as to what that engagement and what those discussions potentially look like, because I will also have to be able to answer that question, which I know a lot of other transit agencies have had to face with their other projects in the state of Washington, and that is, you have options that are currently available from the state of Washington. Why don't you go try one of those first, and then if that doesn't work, why not come back to us? So we're going to have to, just think through, I think, and talk through a little bit more about what that more proactive discussion could look like.
Scott, we certainly can do that when we hear the legislative priorities, but we also had that discussion back in November. In November, we talked about this exact same thing, that we weren't asking for a specific. We were asking to go and research what is out there, what's available, what is the appetite. To spend time, now that the legislators are already spending time organizing their committee and say, we'll talk about that later, does not help whatsoever. This conversation needed to happen a long time ago. It didn't happen between November and now. This set of directors need to get up to Olympia and start having the conversation. We're not asking for a specific. We're asking you to research all through these RCWs of what's going on, what is possible, what language is possible. We, as the city of Vancouver, pointed out 6 different options that have been sitting on the table and no one's discussing it. We waited politely, and then we asked for a language change. We did. But to keep putting this off and let the legislature get started does not help this problem. We must address this problem, and we need to get the Washington legislators on board to start helping us with this unique situation. And I'm going to say it again, nowhere in the entire state of Washington do you have anything like this. This is not a Vancouver situation. This is the economic window into the entire state of Washington. This is I-5. This is the interstate state. This is the bridge up and down the entire West Coast. The state of Washington needs to take their responsibility for this, and we need to push that discussion. So we can talk all we want, but tonight, this needs to move forward, and this staff needs to get going on.